Yeah, sometimes the.
You're live.
Oh, there you go.
There we go. Sweet.
Perfect. Okay, we got it.
Nice. All right. Very nice. Hello. Can everybody hear me? Everyone can see. Perfect. Thanks. That's 1, 2. Everybody can hear us? Anybody? Yeah.
Is it working?
Yep.
There you go.
Cool.
Cool.
Hot spot. I knew it. So are we live right now?
Yeah, we're live.
So hopefully people are on it. You guys
Yeah.
gonna start?
This is probably just, let's wait until the Guinness is pouring that Guinness right now, and then we start. Okay.
I just love it.
Did not come up on the thing. Sarah just said wave. Can you comment? Sarah said wave to me. She's watching it. 3 blondes. Who's on there?
Sarah.
You both look lovely.
Thank you, Sarah.
She's on Snap. Bye.
Shall we? Everybody. Can I get everyone's attention, please? First of all, I'd like to thank everyone for coming today. I know Dad would absolutely love having everybody here, and we really appreciate you coming. For those who don't know, my name's Chris. I'm Don's son, and this is my sister.
I'm Carol.
Carol.
Good to see you guys.
Dad, we're grateful each and every single one of you. We'd like to think that Dad somewhere is sitting back with a perfectly poured Guinness watching us all. Okay. Here, should you take that?
Oh yeah, Chris has it scripted. He's the scripter. I have the gift of gab, so him and I are gonna get in a fight because I'm gonna go off script.
I'm gonna go rogue.
I'm gonna go rogue, and he's gonna.
Nope, there.
Yeah. This is the way it goes. So we'd like to bring up Arlene and Ron Miller. They're our dearest friends. They're kind of our second parents, to be honest. And they knew Mom and Dad for over 50 years. And Arlene makes the best pancakes ever.
Oh my God.
Yeah.
Ron just is going to stand up because he's more nervous than I am.
All right. We'll pass it on to you.
Okay. So as said, somebody asked me if I was Mary's sister, and I said, well, I am, but from another mother. And I'm going to be reading because I'm a little bit afraid I'll forget what I'm going to say if I don't follow my script.
Age, it's age.
So, okay, yeah. So when Chris invited me to say a few words, he worded it like this: as our oldest friends, then he added, length of time knowing you, not your age. Thank you for adding that last. But seeing it is my age, I don't have my little phone to read from because I won't be able to read it in little tiny print. But as I started thinking about the 50 plus years we knew Don, I realized how blessed we were to know him and call him our friend. Don and Mary and baby Chris moved to Edmonton in 1970. Carol was just a twinkle in her dad's eye at the time.
You bet I was.
Ron and I moved there a few months later. We were in a side-by-side duplex and we've been good and close friends ever since. We spent special occasions together every Christmas back and forth, raising our kids together. Camping trips back when we slept in cold tents and really roughed it. Chris and Carol, do you remember the time our dog clawed a hole in the side of our tent? He ran in. We did a lot of fishing back then. Don had a canoe with a little motor on it. I remember one time at Wolf Lake, Mary and I were catching so many jackfish. Don was kept busy taking them off the hooks for us. One year, Ron and I were invited to join them on a houseboat in Shoe Swamp. Carol and Jamie, Ronnie and Gail, you'll remember that.
Yeah.
Maren was there too, just a toddler. Don and his brother Ron brought along their guitars and entertained us around a campfire on shore in the evenings. Remember Gilligan's Island? The theme song keeps coming to my mind where it says, "The mate was a mighty sailing lad, the skipper brave and sure." That was Don and Jamie. They did manage to get us back to the dock, even though the boat, a pontoon boat, developed a leak on one side, and we left back pretty lopsided. Don and Mary loved being on the water. They had kayaks that they used on many lakes, and when Mary bought a motorboat, Don was her captain.
Yeah.
Don always had a love of cycling, as we all know. I can't imagine how many miles he put on his bikes. He cycled in Europe and in Arizona and California and BC, sometimes with Chris, Carol, Jamie, or his brother Ron along. But he also did many solo trips. Being alone never bothered him. He made friends easily, stopping in pubs. He'd chat with the locals and wind up being invited to spend the night with them sometimes. He rode his bike to work summer and winter. And on his lunch break, he sometimes went down to Harwick Park and rode loops around the Circle Road. As you may all have seen on the newspaper that Carol put back there, I was talking about that in mine. One time there were a couple of city police in the park who watched him go by. The next time he came around, they ticketed him for speeding. He got a real kick out of that, a speeding ticket on his bike. Mary didn't cycle, but she did travel with Don, riding behind him on his motorcycle. They took more than one motorcycle trip down the Oregon coast and along California coast. They loved their winter getaways. Many years it was to Jamaica. One year Don decided to try parasailing. That didn't end very well when he landed in the sand and broke his ankle. I can't talk about our history together without talking about a card game called 31. It's been an ongoing tradition to play it when we get together. We started doing it when the kids were little, using 3 pennies each as game tokens. But we graduated through the years to higher values, and when the loonie appeared in our currency, it became 3 loonies. Now the grandchildren play with us too. It's always been such a fun game to us all. But Don used to tease Mary by wiggling his fingers at her, saying, "Woo!" He was putting a hex on her so she'd get bad cards. Mary would get so mad, and Don would grin and chuckle and do it all the more. I think Chris and Carol inherited Don's teasing genes because I've seen them play tricks on Mary many times over the years. Now I can see her reactions. The Mullins all had nicknames for each other in their teasing way. When Mary became an LPN, Don nicknamed her One Doctor. And that stuck. When we looked after their dog Finn, he'd text me and ask, "How's the Welsh Stallion behaving?" Well, looking at some of the pictures I've been seeing, I think she'd be calling him the Irish Stud. When they looked after our little dog, Don called him the Little General. He loved his dogs. I know Carol and Chris and all the girls followed him in that. In the Evite reply, someone said his nickname was Don Juan. I'd like to know how that one came about. I believe it was Jamie that started calling Don Homer. That one really stuck. They had a special relationship, not the proverbial father-in-law one. The two of them spent a lot of time together and even did motorcycle trips together through Jasper and down the Yellowhead Highway. Don and Jamie were great partners out of the cabin, cutting down dead trees and sawing up firewood for their fireplaces. Ron and I were often invited out there. Ron says Don was taken for walks through the low forest. And Don would stop and look up and down a tree saying, "What do you think of that one, Ron? Does it look like it should come down?" But Don loved that place. We went to Costa Rica with Don and Mary a few years ago. I'm an avid birder, and I really wanted to see toucans. Sadly, the only one I saw was flying by. A few months later, Mary and Don went to Cozumel. They messaged me. They were seeing so many toucans. Wow, I was so envious. I didn't know there were toucans in Cozumel. Toucans were there all right in gift shops. They brought me one home. Knowing of my interest in birds and wildflowers, Don would often text me a picture or video when he saw something unusual. He loved gardening, and he was good at it. I was going through my old texts from him, and I'm going to read a quote from the video he sent me a couple of years ago. "Hey Arlene, do you have any use for some of these tomatoes? Because there's no way in hell we can use them all. I'll bring some over to your house, otherwise they're going to get wasted. I got enough to supply the city." He was a real stop and smell the roses type of guy, and he looked at the bright side of things. When he and Mary were in BC just over a year ago, on the way to Penticton, they were in an unavoidable collision. Someone went through a stop sign, pulled out in front of them. Their truck was totaled, their boat damaged, and Mary had an injured shoulder. Don sent me some pictures, and with the pictures he wrote, "Every cloud has a silver lining, and this cloud had a golden lining," meaning it could have been worse. I saw a t-shirt the other day that made me think of Don. On it was written, "That's what I do. I fix stuff, and I know things." Don didn't just fix stuff, he collected stuff. He collected baseball caps, right, Mary? And tools. If he needed something fixed, he had the tools to do it. And if he didn't know how to do it, he'd soon figure it out. I know this past year has been extremely painful for Don's family, but I think also they felt his presence. In the Bible, Jesus said, "Blessed are they that mourn, for they shall be comforted." Jesus was also a fixer of people, and he promised us eternal life. I saw on a page the other day I'd like to close with. Those we love don't go away. They walk beside us every day, unseen, unheard, but always near, still loved, still missed, and always dear.
Okay, let's look at the script. All right, so Uncle Ron, you're up.
Go on.
So my Uncle Ron's my dad's brother, and although he's our uncle, I would say he's more of a brother to us as well. And my God. So come on up.
Okay.
I said they have a spot for your drink. First things first. I do have a question. Is Don always called himself a simple genius? No. So why do his kids and his grandkids call him Homer? Did I miss an episode where Homer says to Marge, "Hey Marge, I'm a simple genius"? Whoops. Okay. So, oops. Let me get the right page here. I am Don's brother, Ron. My mother had a huge imagination. And also about me, as I actually failed high school English. So some of my English isn't the best. So it really wasn't my fault. I had a 76-year-old teacher. She could put you to sleep. And then I had a 24-year-old English teacher. I didn't learn any English there either. She was okay. I've known Dawn for 69 years. And I'm going to read from this because I don't quite have Alzheimer's yet, but I'd say part-timers. Okay, what else did we miss? So we grew up in Maidstone. It's 13 miles outside of Windsor, Ontario. Don had 3 brothers and 3 sisters. I found out later on, I also had 3 brothers and 3 sisters. our house was actually a rundown cottage. It was moved from a beach area onto 3 acres. So the front acre was all playground, which was brilliant, and then the back 2 was cutting wood after school every night to feed the stove and stuff. We had to pump our own water. We actually didn't have an outhouse. It was more like an in-house outhouse. So, and of course, this place was in bad condition. So when a thunderstorm blew through, the first thing you would do is run for pots and pans, because there were so many leaks in that house, and there was 7 of us. So everybody would go run for a pot and just put it under the ceiling and catch the drips and the leaks. Today, I think that's what made me become a drummer. This kind of rhythmus. Often I think about the place when I hear that Burt Bacharach song, Raindrops Keep Falling on My Head. But we would all agree we had the best, absolute best childhood. Just was brilliant. Don was always busy. Front yard was baseball, soccer. He was into flying these planes that they have strings with, and they go around in circles and stuff like that. He asked me to try it. I said it's likely not a good idea because I'll get there, I'll get dizzy, fall down, and crash the plane. No, you try it. I said, okay, I'll try it. So I did. I went around twice, fell down, and crashed the plane. He's the first one to have a 3-speed bicycle. He had a paper route. All good guys have a paper route, right? So he had a 3-speed bike. But the big kicker was he bought a go-kart off a farmer, and it was just your putt-putt Grayson Stratton little 4-cylinder engine. It would likely do about 5 miles an hour. So in the end, he eventually just improved it and improved it, and put slicks on it, and then put I'm trying to get rid of this, and put brakes on it, steering, and the last thing he did was he put a racing go-kart engine on it. So he would have been about 16, I would have been about 13. So a go-kart racing engine is just like a chainsaw. When you pin it, it just goes wow. So we take this thing out the road, but the neighbors complained because it was a bit noisy. So we came up with the idea we would take it to a Walmart parking lot, well, local at the time. I would get on it. He would get in his car, and he would follow me along in the car and see how fast it would go. So the Walmart started up, and I started on this side, and I went around like this. And that's pretty big area. Well, I kept going, and I never seen him. And I thought, what the hell do you? I thought maybe his car broke down or something. So I kept going, and finally I see a wheel on a car. I thought, oh, finally he's here. Well, not exactly. It was the Windsor Police. So they pulled me over. I was likely about 14 years old. And he says, do you want to shut that off? And I says, okay, sir. And I says, was I doing something wrong? He said, yeah, you were speeding. I says, okay. And he asked me, you been drinking? I said, no. I says, okay. And he said, well, sonny boy, you're going to have to take that go-kart home. I says, okay. But the thing was, we wanted to know how fast it would go. At that point, I asked Mr. Policeman, I I says, was I going too fast? And he says, yeah, you were doing 53 miles an hour. And you know something? When you got to go 53 miles an hour, you could feel the wind like the back air coming from a jet engine. It was just on you. So next time you're shopping in Wolco and you step out the door, just watch out for some kid that's going by at 53 miles an hour, 4 inches on the ground on a go-kart. He bought a 63 Ford Fairlane, was his first dandy car. Turquoise, bucket seats. It was a beautiful car, really. Yeah. And of course, when we were growing up as kids, there was like, seven kids? Yeah, 7 kids and 2 parents, apparently. So that makes 9 of us. So we had nine people in a Volkswagen bus with a powerful 36 horsepower engine. So when Don bought this car, I thought, wow, this is going to be like great. So he took me for a ride, and wow, like this thing would go from 0 to 60 in about, I don't know, let's say 10 seconds. Like that's the first time I've ever felt acceleration in my life. The Volkswagen would go from 0 to 45 in about 4 miles. We'd only pass one vehicle ever, and as kids, it was just a real thrill. I mean, it's like, hey, we're going to do it finally. So we did. I don't know what that guy in the farm tractor thought, but it didn't really matter. Yeah, of course, cycling was Don's big kicker. I think he cycled back and forth to work every day, right? Yeah. Even in the winter, he was telling me about how he's putting studs in his wheels and his bike and stuff like that. Excuse me. He also said he cycled from southern BC. I think I've got this right. And he went south for 17 days. At 17 days, he was at the Mexican border. Not a bad deal. You generally do about 120 miles a day, and you do that times 17. That's where you end up, at the Mexican border. He's also been all over the world cycling. As Arlene said, he's been heaps of countries and stuff like that. But the best cycling I'd ever seen him do was the first trip I did with California with him. We're going down the coast of California, and we had left Oceanside, which is north of San Diego, about 40 miles. So we're going downhill, and these 2 guys in a bicycle, tandem, dressed for the Olympics, like tight gear and the whole mess, they bypassed me like crazy. But the next, coming right up is Torrey Pines Hill. Torrey Pines Hill is 380 feet of unstoppable torture. So I see these guys go out and they pass Don. And I'm just coming down the hill and he's starting to go up the hill. So I see him shift down and this bike starts rocking back and forth like this. And it's just going insane. He's loaded. These guys they're likely ready for the Olympics on a tandem bike with no weight, just a light bicycle and themselves. So before the end of the hill, I see him do this. He overtakes him. He's at the top of the hill. He's at the top of the hill and he's leaning over, shaking his head like this. Just like he did something wrong. So eventually I get to the top of the hill and I'm going to tell you exactly what I said. I said, shame, shame, shame. You're an asshole. So I sit down on this bench And he comes up to me and he says, guess what? I says, what? He says, do you know what that guy said? I says, no, what did he say? He's playing at Walmart, he's quitting the Olympics, selling his bike, and suicide, what? He says, no, he says, in the exact words, there is no low, is there? So we kept that saying between us for a long time. When you got into a situation where somebody was being a total moron or whatever, there is no low, is there? And it worked. Going down the coast of California the first time, took our bikes from, I think I was living in Edmonton here at the time, of course, so we packed our bikes up, go to California. I'd never been there before. Set the bikes together, and I'm ready to go. He looks at me, he says, so where do you want to go? I said, I've never been here before. How am I supposed to know? So anyways, we go to Muscle Beach, where all the cuckoos are. Thoroughly enjoyed that. It was entertaining. Cycled up the coast, went to Santa Barbara. It was all good. And then he said, well, if you're going north, you're going to Big Sur. Well, I'm not hip to that. I mean, you know, I'm dealing with somebody who's got legs like a grasshopper, so I'm not going to deal with that. So we turned around and went back the other way. We both wanted to go through the Queen Mary. So we end up going through the Queen Mary. And then we find out the bottom end of the Queen Mary is open for inspection, like all the turbines, the boilers, the steam room, da-da-da-da-da. Well, that was a 3-hour tour. And it went that long, but the kicker was, I mean, California gets pretty dark at 5 o'clock. So it was about maybe 3 o'clock. We ended up getting out of there, and as we're walking out of the ship, at the front of the Queen Mary, there's this girl standing at like one of these. And of course, we're walking by, and it's just so happened to be a bar. And she looked at us guys, and she says, now there's a couple of boys that look like they need a beer. Well, neither one of us would reply because neither one of us wants to take the responsibility for what's about to happen. So he was there, leaning down. I was there, leaning down. So finally he looked up. Well, okay. So we go in there. We have a beer, and then this young girl comes on with his jazz quartet. Well, now I knew we're doomed. So we stayed, and then of course, by the time we left there, it was dark. I had no light in my bike. He had a little light in his bike. The next campground is like, I don't know, 15 miles away. We're on the Pacific Coast Highway. Like, that's safe. So what do? We're ready to set up outside the hallway in the ship and stuff like that. But I actually went and asked, and they said you could actually stay on the ship. And I thought, oh, really? And I said, how much is it? It was $55 US. That was a lot of money back then. We were staying at State Park beaches for 50 cents a night. That's a lot of State Park beaches. Anyways, we stayed there, and that was good. Next night we took off and went down the highway and stayed at another State Park beach. State Park Beach, there's a lot of poor people there. So we ended up, as per usual, we'd get our own food because you can never eat enough food because you're going to wear it off on your bike. So next thing, we'd have steaks and beans or pork chops and beans or something like that. And this one guy came up to us, and Don's cooking these steaks on this grill. And he says, you know, mister, I wouldn't be cooking that in here because all these people haven't eaten and God knows what. So they ended up eating and stuff. And then we went over and joined him. And there's all these cardboard boxes from refrigerators there. And I thought, we'll turn this place into a dump. Well, guess what? That's not what that is. That's where the poor people sleep. When they're done for the night, they crawl into a freaking refrigerator box that comes in and they stay there for the night. It was a learning experience, you know. Not everybody would know such a thing, but that's where they stayed. So to top off the end of the trip, we went to San Diego and putzed around there. And when we were in San Diego, we rode from there to Tijuana and then Tijuana back. And then when we got back to Tijuana, actually I met this girl on the way down there and back. And she said, I'll meet you at the airport. And I said, well, okay, fine. So she came and met me at the airport. And then I went in and had a couple of drinks with her and stuff. And next thing you know, Don comes into the restaurant and says, by the way, he says, the plane's leaving. Are you coming or are you staying here? As far as music goes, I lived here in 1971 for a brief time. Don played guitar, played a lot of Gordon Lightfoot stuff. So drums and guitar didn't work very good. So I learned the bass little by little, and that's how that started. And then years later, I go over to his place when I moved back here in about 82. He was, he was still living at the same house, and then I had just moved here. So ended up I go over to his place and we practiced all night at the table back and forth. And in the end, one night we're sitting there singing and playing back and forth, and it was like 4 hours. I thought, wow, we're playing for 4 hours. That's a long time. So of course we used to drink at the power plant. And at the power plant, we were there quite often. And so one night when we were there, I noticed that at 8 o'clock all the people were clearing out. And so I looked over at him and I said, you know something? I says, we should play this joint. And of course, I could always read his face. He was kind of like, oh no. And so anyways, I went up and asked the barkeep, and he says, okay, you can do it and see how it goes. So we did. We played the first song. It was Runaway by Del Shannon. I never forgot it because there was people standing up on the frickin', or women dancing on the tables before the end of the song. Don was in his glory, and I was just enjoying the moment. And but at the end, I could tell he gets this nervous place, like, now what? And I already had the song and all the stuff on the go, but that was quite the experience. Even after about the third or fourth time we played there was a table like of about 30 or 40 people. Don knew everybody. So ended up, he had his guitar and I was pushing the bass amp, and when we went by and somebody stood up and says, hey, it's the Mullin brothers. And Don waves and I waved and stuff, and another guy stood up and says, yeah, the Mullin brothers, just what we need. 2 guys that turned this party into a mess. I never forgot that. Later on, I put a gig together where actually my father was born in a place called Chepstow, Ontario, which is about north of London, 90 miles. And I got them all together, my brother Pat, Don, myself. I forced my dad to come. He plays violin, fiddle, and that worked really well. He actually stole the show. People just loved the fiddle, jig stuff or whatever the heck it was, so it worked really good. And at one point, Don had said, if you got to play in Chepstow, you got to have a fiddle in the band. And near the end, the bartender came up, actually he was the owner, Pat, and said, I'd like to introduce everybody and where you're from and so forth. And of course, Pat was from Mullin Sound, Don was from Edmonton, But in the end, he asked me where I was from, and Don beat me to the microphone and said, outer space. We had different guys come up. We had, I don't know if you remember, people like Ronnie Calmer at the gate, Patty, Hank came up and sang Heard It in a Love Song, I think, or wasn't it? That's right. And yeah, it was all good. It was a really good time. So I think I'm pretty much come to an end here. Don was always super fair. It's been a great ride. There's two kinds of there's two kinds of people in your life. There's ones that complement your life, and there's ones that complicate your life. And Don could compliment all the time. It was good. I guess I can't go on anymore, so I hope I did this as I could. Thanks a lot. Don was actually doing my best well. And yeah, he shared everything. Even when we were in BC, the last gig I put up, we went to BC, we got in his boat, he was just in his glory of using the boat for so long. And I bought some yellow beans. He loved yellow beans, but being so fair that there was 5 yellow beans left and we both love them. And he says, do you want any? And I said, yeah. And we always did that. If there was this much wine left in the bottle, how much, do you want some? Yes. We always split. That was the rule.
Well, there were 7 kids in your family, so you kind of had to.
Exactly. And so what does he do with 5 beans? Takes 2, cuts 1.5. Thanks for showing up, everybody. Appreciate it.
I'd like to ask John Beamish to come up. John Beamish is instrumental in Dad's career. Works at the U of A department and the physics, and he's a dear friend of Dad. And he hits the biggest home runs I've ever seen in my life.
So as Chris said, for those that don't know me, John Beamish. And I worked here at the university. Get ready to more. It's making a lot. So we worked in the physics department for a long time, actually, but not quite as long as the other people here. Let's go. So Don actually came to the university first in 1971. And that's actually the same year I arrived. I was fresh out of high school. I was a physics student. And so Don started as a technician and stayed as a technician, actually. And he started with John Adler's lab, which is a low temperature physics research lab. The first time I met him was actually a few years later. I was an undergraduate and I was taking John Adler's solid state physics course. And on one Monday, Don showed up instead of the professor. And he just announced there was no professor and the class was canceled. And then he came back pretty much every week to tell us the same thing, because John Adler at that time was really keen on skiing and mountain climbing, and he didn't find our class very convenient, so he'd be away at least once a week for it. But times are good for professors in those days. I think I also might be the person who played softball with Don the longest ago, maybe not the total. When I was a graduate student here, because I stayed as an undergraduate and a graduate student, I worked in the lab kind of next door to where Don was a technician. But one of the things I did is I organized the physics softball team. which is mostly graduate students, but some other people, Don, played with us. And I claim I gave him his big break. We were playing one time, and one of the undergraduate students in Don's lab Don brought him out, and he was a monster. That was the most athletic guy I ever saw, and he was a little overly enthusiastic. So the first thing he did was at shortstop, he threw a ball so hard that the first baseman's hand broke. And we really couldn't convince anybody else to go in first, so Don stepped forward and spent the next 35 years of his life playing first base. So I was away, then I left and worked in the US, and I came back to the university as a faculty member in 1991. Don kind of returned the favor. One of the first things Don did was say, do you want to come and play softball with the dead dogs? So I did. Then I got another 25 years or so of softball. Actually, I was noticing, and I checked here, so there are more ex-dead dogs here. I think the description I've seen of the dead dogs was motley, decrepit. But surprisingly durable. The teams played together for 25 years in intramurals, which I think is a record for the university in any sport. But I think we concluded that we could field a full team with substitutes at most here today. The substitutes at most positions. So just out of interest, say, all dead dogs stand up. Anybody who's played a game as a dead dog, I'm curious. We didn't look much more athletic in our time. Anyway, Don's last day of work, I think, I looked it up, I checked my emails. I think his last day of work at campus was in my lab on December 2nd, 2016, as far as I know. His last official paid day anyway. So Don and I overlapped at the university in physics for 45 years, which is actually a long time. And so given that, I thought, since many of you don't know so much about Don's work or his career in the physics department, I talk a bit about that because it's kind of part of both of our lives for a long, long time. So when Don first came here, was the good old days again, when each professor was given a technician. And so Don worked for John Adler. And he worked for him for 20 years, from 1971 to 1991. Along with a lot of graduate students, Don worked really closely with. One of them was Joseph Strauss, if anybody knows, the person who was once Canada's probably richest man. Was a PhD student in Don's lab, and he knew him really well. When I arrived in 1991, John Adler was just retiring. And so he essentially gave me Don. He came and said, I'm going to give you Don. And so Don was given to me as a technician in my lab. It's from some sort of kind of indentured service or something that they used to give as technicians. So Don started working in my lab in 1991. If you ever met his original boss, John Adler, did Mary say something? For those of you who haven't met him, John Adler had high standards, absolutely. And he was a bit intimidating. Actually, I'd say he's an awful lot intimidating.
Yes.
And I know at least one chair of the physics department that just lived in mortal terror of John Adler. But I got along with him pretty well, which is why he gave me Don. In fact, when he gave me Don, well, he did. I mean, he pretty much said that. But when he did, he looked at me, John Adler looked at me really closely and said, you're getting the best technician in the department, and you better treat him right. So I did, and it was right. And then the way Don actually earned John Adler's respect was kind of interesting. First of all, he would never have had any respect if he had been really good at his job, if he had been a really good technician. There's no chance that John Adler would respect anybody otherwise. But the other thing that Don did, and I can remember him describing his own words, is Don was a pretty young guy, and John Adler was pretty intimidating. And John Adler would kind of start screaming sometimes at people. And Don actually would just stand right up to him right from the beginning. He'd stand in front of them. And Don's words, which I think are quoted to me once. He would just tell John Adler, "You are a bad-tempered old bugger," which was pretty accurate. But John Adler, I think, respected that. A combination of Ron's skill and his willingness to stand up, and they actually became friends. So Ron was telling me about how they went to Mexico. That was John Adler and Don that cycled from the Canadian border to Mexico. They were really good friends, despite Don being probably the only person who stood up to him in that way.
I did too.
Good for you. Okay, it's a family thing. Because there were a lot of people that couldn't. In fact, the students were not also always so lucky in John Adler's lab. I mean, Don sort of saved them, I think. So when Adler got really upset, he could be loud and aggressive. And Don had told him what he was. But sometimes when a student broke something, it happens inevitably if you work in the lab. You break something. I told students when they start with me, you're going to break something. I expect it. I just don't expect you to keep doing it. And so every student breaks something. And when they did, there were a few of them that were terrified of what John Adler would say. And so they called Don. And Don gave him the same advice. Disappear. Go home. And I'll call you when it's okay. And then he would fix whatever it was. He would just fix it. And he wouldn't tell John Adler anything had happened until it was fixed. And then he would tell him, he'd come back. After Don died, several students emailed me, because I'd sort of send them a message to give them the news. And several of them said that Don was the reason that they were able to complete their PhD. And in one case, even the reason he was still in Canada, because he sort of saved them when they needed it and helped them when they were going through their program. So actually, one of the students I found out at that time was one of my students. And I'm not nearly that mean, but the student had been working in the lab and he messed with something he knew perfectly well he shouldn't have, and it broke. And it was a long weekend, I can't remember if it was Easter or something. And the only thing he could think to do was phone Don at home. And Don came in right away and he fixed it on the long weekend. And it was working again. I didn't know that for 20 years. Like Don kept the confidence. So over the last couple of weeks, I've actually thought, sort of thinking about this celebration coming up, thought a lot about Don, but partly about why he was such a good technician. And we work in a field, low temperature physics, experimental field, where experiments are really actually hard, because you're trying to do things at very, very low temperature in a complicated apparatus, and even the smallest, tiniest leak in anything, or one wire connector that doesn't work, that's the end of the experiment. You start all over again. And so it's kind of challenging. Don loved that challenge, actually. I think he loved working at university because it wasn't routine. He just really enjoyed solving problems. And when I first came here, though, in 1991, I was setting up a new lab. And Don was familiar with the sort of things I did. But I have to admit, I got a little frustrated in the first few weeks because we were putting stuff together and something would be broken or leaking or something. And I kind of expected Don to do what I would have done, which was take a torch, solder everything together. A few minutes, I could solder something, leak check it, and then hopefully it would be okay. Usually it wasn't, actually. But what Don would do when I showed him something, he would look at it, and he would use what is a phrase I think of every time I see something poorly done. He would just look at it and look at it for quite a while. Look again, and it's, I don't love that. Anytime he saw something, it was ugly. I don't love that. And then he would disappear, it's gone. He would just walk away, and I didn't see him. And the next day he'd come in, and the next he would have gone to the machine shop, and he would have built the ultimate tool in the machine shop to do exactly that one job. And he would come in, and his technique, some of you may remember it, was again, he would sit down, he'd look at it for a long time. And then if it was a soldering job, not a torch, well, he'd get a torch, he'd get the most antique old copper soldering iron you've ever seen, weighed about a pound. He'd heat it up with a torch, and then he'd put on 2 pairs of reading glasses, one over top of the other, because he couldn't see very well at short distances. And they'd look at it, and he'd slowly, carefully fix it. And it was good for 20 years, almost invariably. Whereas my technique usually meant I fixed it, didn't work, I fixed it, it didn't work, and I called Don. I eventually learned that slow and careful was way, way faster than fast and sloppy. Don was remarkable about that. He planned and did everything, and then he did it, and usually just had to do it once. So a couple of days ago, I went to my lab, and I was just sort of curious. I thought, okay, I should look and just see what sort of things Don made. I think a few of them, if you were looking at some of his slides, you saw some technical stuff. Mostly that was stuff Don made, or made in my lab, or made together, but those were Don's things. And I realized that my lab is kind of like a museum to Don. It is. Like almost everything's individually built in the lab like that, and Don built almost all of it. And almost all is in perfect working condition. In fact, one of the things I saw, which I really hadn't thought about before, is I opened a cabinet and I saw a whole stack of boxes written in my hand. It was written in jigs. And a jig is just a tool you use to do a job properly. You make it for a job, you clamp something down, it's perfect for the job. And I have whole boxes of them that are all Don's jigs that were sort of a one-time fix. Most of them have been used again by other people only later. I mean, most of them have proved their value by repeatedly fixing a problem. And I have to say, Don's jigs were sometimes very clever. They're not routine, but sometimes he built things that you would never have thought of, and they were just perfect for the job. So, you know, often if you go to a professor's retirement, they start talking about their awards and history and stuff. And technicians don't really think of it in terms of awards. Don was kind of a legend at the university, he was. When I sort of later didn't spend as much time in the lab because I was doing more administration, Don moved in, he became the supervisor of all the physics department specialist technicians. And so a lot more people than just me or John Adler got to know what Don could do. In 2004, after I'd been doing that for a while, he actually got what I think is more or less the university's only award for technicians. It's the Nat Rutter Outstanding Technician Award. He received it for all his work in the department. And actually, I talked to Don later, and he was highly unimpressed with himself getting an award. He said, and it was just completely sincere, he said he didn't think too much of awards. The thing he liked was helping students get their stuff working and helping the students move forward. But he's one of the few technicians that have received such an award. He was, however, quite often an author of a scientific paper for the contributions he made. And one time I remember he came to me wondering what he should do. He'd received a research proposal, a grant proposal from the United States National Science Foundation to review. They just looked at his paper and assumed he was a professor, so they sent it to him to be reviewed for a large grant from the US. He actually didn't want to do it, and so I thought he should, but he didn't. So he just sort of contacted himself, I'm a technician. But I think he should have. The other award that I know of Don, it was kind of subtly referenced in a scientific paper too. So one of the papers, he wasn't an author, but in the acknowledgements, John Adler had put him down as acknowledging him for all his contributions, and it said, Donald Mullin, BB. And so when it was published, he showed it to Don, and Don sort of went, what is BB? What do the initials BB stand for? Well, he made the mistake of telling John Adler years before, I don't know what the circumstances were, that when he was in grade 1, he was the best boy in the class. And so Don Adler kind of filed that away and decided he got it into a paper. So I should look up the paper sometime. It's like some people have, so-and-so PhD, it's Don Mullin, BB. And my final proof of Don's low temperature technical abilities is in 1998, I had a sabbatical at Cornell University, and it was, and probably still is, maybe the most famous low temperature physics research group in the world. And one of the things they did, people there have Nobel Prizes for low temperature physics, et cetera, but they also wrote the definitive book on technical low temperature methods. And various students contributed to it, for example. But Don visited for a couple of days when I was there. He was on his way back from Ontario. And the mark of his skill must be that Eric Smith was one of the authors of this famous book. He was the technical guru of low temperature physics. famous. And Don showed him how to do something he'd been trying to figure out for years. In the days he was there, it wasn't actually physics, it was more to do with nighttime orienteering, but he was highly impressed. And the other thing that I think cemented his international reputation was he went for a run lunch with Eric Smith and kept up, which Eric Smith doesn't look like a runner, but you don't keep up easily. So Don has a long reputation at Cornell just based on 2 days there. So I could tell stories about Don's technical stuff forever, but more, I think I'll just mention a few of the Don phrases, and I think a couple of them have already come up here that everybody that knows him associates with him, I think. And one was later in his career, he was known as the simple genius.
Yes.
There's even t-shirts with that on it.
Yeah.
Don's face, simple genius on it. And it started as a joke, but it stuck. Another one, if you worked with him or saw him work with somebody and he did something that he thought, that was routine. And you'd ask him, but he says, a monkey could do that. And I think it was a very patient, talented, technical monkey, but still. And I mentioned the one I think about it almost every time I break or fix something, is just looking at it and saying, I don't love that. And it should be done right. So I'll just finish up with a few things that aren't work, although they might get university, because all of you know Don in many ways, and so do I, not just as a technician in the lab or anything else. And he was not just the Dead Dogs, he was the old man of the legendary Dead Dogs, right? But he also was the organizer, one of the organizers all along of an annual softball game and an annual hockey game for all the students and people in the physics department. Most of them were international students. It was great. They picked up the wrong end of the bat. It fell down on the ice. It was great. And it went on for years. And Don was always there, often helping to organize it. And people have mentioned, or Ron especially mentioned biking with him. And I bike, not seriously. I never went anything more than a couple hours with Don. But the first time I remember biking with him was 1978 when I was a student. And the last time was a few months before he died. So when I was a student, a graduate student especially, and got to know Don really well, there were a whole bunch, Mary probably remembers them, there were a whole bunch of impromptu, we'd get on our bikes after work or something, there'd be an impromptu barbecue. Don would find broken up furniture or something to burn. And there'd be a barbecue in their backyard. And that's where I first met Carol, when she was about that big, and Chris when he was about that big, and got to know the family and stuff. And I've known him for now quite a long time. Actually, Chris isn't in front of me right now, but he actually played softball on our physics graduate team. He was 12 at the time, and the minimum age to play in intramurals at the university is 18. So we had to register him as a girl, because people didn't scrutinize the women playing as closely. We didn't dress him up or anything. Everybody was happy to have him play. And then the other thing you had to do, though, was you had to figure out how to get Chris at age 12 smuggled into the power plant afterwards, which we did. Sometimes one of our players' raincoats, so you play pinball while everybody was having beer. For power plant, I also remember the power plant very well, as most people in that era did. I remember Don and Ron playing there a lively time. And actually, there's some songs like Margaritaville. I cannot hear that without seeing Don playing Margaritaville. He was a great person to go to a pub with, I have to say. And I think one of the high water marks was after our Dead Dogs game, we were in the Avenue Pizza bar, and who walks in but Jack Layton?
Oh, yeah.
The next thing he does, Don's invited him over and he's having beer with our team. That was kind of fun. Anyway, probably almost everybody here, you could tell Don Mullin stories forever, and the ones I've heard before, they were just so utterly typically Don. Right? Ron you have a great imitation I saw that a lot, you know, I just, you screwed up, he wasn't ragging you, he was just, well, he wasn't. But anyway, I'll stop with the stories. I'll just say, I worked closely with Don for 30 years. I never had a fight or even an argument with him.
I had a few.
Well, yeah, I believe it. But every day when I work with him, you have my respect. But the thing I'm proudest of was he was my friend for all those years.
First, thanks very much, John. Thanks for pointing out that I was registered as a girl. I really appreciate that.
That
Thanks.
makes a ton of sense. You're lucky you mentioned it because I was going to. By the way, as we were getting into my dad's work attire, his
Everything.
yeah.
Everything.
I just want to say that our argument in the back was that how good his legs were. And then Jamie walked by and he said, "You have good legs."
I know. Okay.
What was happening? I need my older glasses on.
Okay, so thank you very much, John. I appreciate those kind words. It was John was very helpful getting a lot of pictures together, and he was a huge communicator for the people in physics and for me. And hearing some of his stories was just absolutely fantastic. So thank you so much, John. I appreciate it. Dad's lifelong friend, Peter McLeod, had a famous quote: "Don never worked a day in his life."
I think what was great about John's speech is that from when we were really young, we had no idea what my dad did for a living.
No way.
No idea. We knew that he worked at the U of A and he worked in the physics department. And John Beamish and John Adler, we heard many stories about both you guys forever. But whenever Dad would come home riding up Groat Road on his bike on a winter or summer day, we'd ask about his day. "Hey Mom, how's your day? How's your day?" We'd sit at the dinner table all together. Now I'm going off script. And he'd say, "Oh, it's such a great day," and we'd be really attentive and listening. And he'd say, "I went for coffee at 8:30 with my coffee group, and Carol, you're here." Then he'd talk about how he would go for his afternoon take 10K run because he was training and Bruce Todd was there. And then of course later on in the afternoon for, I don't know, his third, fourth break, he'd go for a badminton game with Dick and Len, wherever you guys are. And then also he would talk about how he had his grad students or his students that he'd love to work with. And he would tell us about going to the power plant or RAT for their orientation. Yeah. So that was always good. But it wasn't really until we saw his retirement party video that we were shocked to hear things like low temperature scanning.
Tunneling, microscope.
Yeah.
Never heard that word.
Never. We never talked about like nanotechnology or some craziness like that. And we're like, holy, you are a simple genius. Wow.
Of course, I cannot even think about glossing over softball. And our much feared Dead Dog softball team that Dad coached and played first base on. Dad loved coaching. He prepared for the game and he absolutely loved playing it. Our Sunday and afternoon practices were a fine opportunity for us to really tune up our team and just make us a lethal weapon. It was, and we can't forget about the amazing times on Sunday after those games or after those practices. We had so much fun at the pub. I do have to say one thing.
Here it comes.
Ready?
Here it comes.
To my heavy hitters on the Dead Dogs and the home, I am still the undisputed home run king.
So that's like John, Jamie, Al.
I'm still one. So I just had to say it finally.
You had to put that in.
I had to put it in there. So, we've developed so many great friendships and lifelong friends from with all of you guys. It's so great to see everybody here again. Truer friends could not have been had ever. Looking back on that team, I realized how special it was.
I think one of the things that we didn't talk about with baseball, which was quite comical to me, is we'd go to the pub, all of us, after baseball, and Jamie and I, when I first had my first daughter, we used to argue about who got to go, and Jamie typically would win. But the funny part was that the fourth pitcher of beer was always free at this local pub. I can't believe you didn't mention it, John. And so we'd all be looking at our watches, thinking, oh gosh, we better get home to our spouses and significant others because we've been playing baseball all afternoon, and then we've been at the bar for like 3 hours. And but then someone would say, and I think it was usually Bob. Where are you, Bob? Yeah, you know what the saying was. We were buying our second pitcher, and then someone would say, but if we get one more, a third, then we'll get the fourth one free. And so the saga continued.
Even sometimes the cycle would continue after
Again.
that.
Again.
So it was some damage to ourselves.
Yeah, sorry, Mom.
Yeah.
It just happened. So you've heard this already. Dad was always super prepared, and always. He always had, when we're biking, he'd bring like suitcases of tools and he'd carry them, and we hardly ever use them, but once in a while he would pull something out and have something fixed. He always had that Swiss Army knife in his pocket, and certainly I know that he's given a couple to the grandkids for sure. The thing was, he always had his favorite tools in the garage. They were always outlined, and I think they were in his lab too. So if he had a hammer, it would be outlined in the garage and all of those tools. And so what I used to do, being his mischievous daughter, was I'd come home and I'd move them all around so he wouldn't know. Yeah, he'd go mental. Or I'd just take one down and he'd think that Pricer took it. So that would always be good. He'd always give me a phone call by the time I got home though, so he'd give me trouble. One of the funny stories that I remember about his, thinking outside of the box kind of innovation was when Jamie, my husband, and him took a trip from Edmonton to Vancouver. And they had a particularly hard riding day. It was 220 kilometers they did from, where was it, Jay? Kamloops to Cache Creek, that's right. And so it was pretty much a whole uphill day that day. And my dad always said that Jamie found Jeebus that day because he was crying for God as he was getting up to the top of the hill. And so by the time they got to their campsite, Jamie was spent. My dad was an avid cyclist. This was a piece of cake for him, but sorry, hon, but you were spent. Very quiet, I'm sure. And the only thing you said is, as you're setting up camp, is that you didn't have beer. So of course, Dad got on his bike and he rode another 10K to get beer. And he was telling the liquor store guy about what he was doing, and he said the urge was just too great. And so by the time he got back to the campsite, Jamie had the site set up, and Jamie's only comment was, "Why did you only get 6, Homer?" The other thing too that I'll always remember, and John, you kind of hit it on the head, is that Dad was always very slow and meticulous about all of the work he did. So it was always a battle of the minds whenever I had a renovation at my house, because Jamie's just kind of not built for that. So Jamie would want to get it done. My husband's nickname is Captain Patience. And so it was a battle of the minds back and forth, and over time they kind of got into the rhythm. But I will secretly tell you, Jamie, that whenever there was a renovation happening and the level and the tape measure weren't out, I would call my dad and say, "Please come over. Just pretend you're coming for a visit. Hurry."
I remember, yeah. One time, Dad, this is when we were young, our TV broke down. And it was an old big Zenith TV, and TV not working was definitely torture. So he opened up the back, figured out what was wrong. He went downstairs into his many drawers, pulled out the part for that TV, and fixed the TV. And he said, "A monkey could have done it." And he, who fixes a TV nowadays? And he was always fixing things like that. He just had that natural gift. It was really astonishing. So I ended up being a professional musician, and my dad was a huge influence on me. Music was always an integral part of Dad's life, and he inspired me to become a musician. I picked up the bass, and Dad was my first bandmate. So every night after dinner, Dad and I would sit down, We learned some country western song, and we had a big rep after a while, and we ended up playing in a band together. We did some weddings and some parties, and and it was a lot of fun. Him and I just had a tremendous bond together when it came to music. And after I became there's a music store called Mother's Music, and they used to have a half price sale every year. And it was always in January, and it was a true half price sale. So we'd get up at 6 a.m, go line up, and we'd get I'd come home with a new bass every time. And I'd be so excited, and Dad would say, just don't tell your mother, every time. So after I became a professional musician, and Uncle Ronnie and Dad and my mom would fly out and just see the show, and I'd be on stage, and I'd just try to find Dad, and every time I'd find him, he'd give me the thumbs up. And it was always a huge thrill for me. And I think it was, he was so instrumental in my becoming a musician that, it was a thrill for him and a thrill for me as well. So go ahead.
Awesome.
Yeah.
So we've already talked about this through my Uncle Ron and Arlene and John, but my dad was, a physical fit buff. He was a true athlete and especially loved being on his bikes. So he did many trips, California, Ireland, so many more. He took me on a month to Europe, and you're going to talk about your trip in a little bit. I don't know why he took me first. Well, he liked me better. I was his favorite, but I was 13 and pubescent, so I don't know what he was thinking.
I just had lots of friends. I was so popular. That's no.
Anyway, so lots of trips. Do you guys know how many times he was hit by a car on his bike? Is there any guesses? 4 times. 4 times. I remember I got a call at midnight one night, and my mom had said, Dad's in a merge, and I'm like, did he get hit by a car again? She said yes. So the other thing too is we mentioned that Dad had gone back and forth to work his whole life on his bike, and I remember as a kid him coming home in the dead of winter, and his beard would be full of icicles and whatnot. So we actually calculated the amount of kilometers he did to and from work over 45 years, and it was about 125,000 kilometers that he rode to work. That doesn't include, though, when he was orientating folks from the lab to power plant and RAT, or when Ryan, you had to drive him home, as he just told me today, so thanks for that. He had 4 bikes that he loved, and what was interesting, when he had his first open heart surgery, he told the surgeon that he got bumped. And so he said to the surgeon, if I come back tomorrow then, because we all went in with him that day, which I thought was really nice, but he's like, well, you guys took today off. Don't come in tomorrow. I'll run my bike in for my open heart surgery. And the surgeon kind of looked at us like, what? Is this right? And then after that surgery, he actually rode his bike to his cardiac rehab every day. So his cardiologist, would just do the kind of shaking his head as Dad would do, but and then he also loved running, so he did a lot of running with his friends too, and he loved doing the Jasper Banff relay race. That was one of his favorites.
So Dad and I, we also did many bicycle tours together. We did California, Oregon, England, Wales, and France. And one time during a rain-soaked day in Europe, what happened was we came to a stop, and there was a ton of punk rockers. They came on, and they were swearing and drinking, and they were farting, and most people would kind of shy away from that group, but Dad turned around and just started talking to the lead punk rocker, and within 5 minutes they were best of friends. So we ended up staying 3 days with this massive group of punk rockers. There was about 15 of us sleeping in a room about this big on the floor in camp, and basically in sleeping bags. We had so much fun, and then the big highlight of that was we saw U2 in concert, the Joshua Tree tour, and we just had so much fun. And then every year, Dad would get Christmas cards from the punk rockers, and Dad would send the punk rockers Christmas cards back. And it always amazed me how we could develop friendships so quickly, and not just surface level, but really, really solid friendships. So,
Gift of gab.
The gift of gab. Okay.
So I think, just in closing, Dad's legacy can be seen certainly in his granddaughters.
Okay. Dad had a mischievous sense of humor and loved to tease, and I see that in my daughter Sarah.
Uh-oh. You're good? All right. Dad had that love of sports, as we're talking about, in nature, and certainly berry picking. Jamie, you know about this. He used to get mad at him. You'd be cycling up the road and come back to look for where he was, and he would be covered in blueberries all up and down his chest. And Anyway, he loved his outdoor adventures, his risk-taking, and traveling was key in his life. And he'd always say travel is where you truly learn.
And that was, you learned about life, and you passed this on to your daughter, Mary. Dad was highly intellectual and always described himself as a simple genius.
He strived for, we're gonna tag team. He strived for lifelong learning. And Chris's daughter, Emily, her love of learning and passion for academic excellence would make him proud.
We should change this. We should have done this instead.
No?
It's too hard.
Okay.
Okay, now go. Keep going. Okay.
Anyway, Dad possessed a gentle and kind, generous spirit. You can see that.
People are drawn to him and his infectious personality. This lives in your daughter, Jen.
We're getting the clip. Talk amongst yourselves. Okay. Good.
Okay. You know, a few months before Dad passed, I was home for a visit. I decided to go for a bicycle ride. And Dad would always come with me. And he wasn't up to it at the point. So I was just going to get on my bike and just go for a quick bike ride. And Dad would not have anything to do with that. He said, you're not prepared. So he comes.
You never were.
I never were. I just always just go off running and he'd just shake his head. Oh, all right. But anyways, he would, so he said, just wait a little bit. He goes and gets a big backpack filled with water, granola bars, so many tools. I had no idea what half of them did. So, and looking back on that, it was such a kind thing for him to do. And I really, looking back, I thought it was really special. That was our dad.
No, it's okay.
So I think at this point, if we just want to invite anyone up, if you have a funny story about my dad to tell, please do. And if not, then we'll just raise our glass for a cheers. Everyone's got a little Guinness there. So
Let's do the cheers, and then we'll have people up.
oh yeah, let's do a cheers.
There we go. That's favorite beer.
Oh, I don't have.
Oh, okay. Obviously, I think 99% of us know Guinness was Dad's passion, and if you could just raise a glass to Dad. We miss you, Dad.
Oh, that's close.
Please feel free to come up. If anybody has a moment or two to share a story, we would appreciate it.
Sorry, hi. Hi. My name is Yu Yang. Sorry. So, John, I was one of those students who had to survive John with the help of Don Mullin. So I managed to graduate with a master's degree. I think, John, you said it right. Many of the former students say the same thing. Don made it so much easier for us to learn in that environment and survive as a student to move on and have a career. I broke down a few times during the speech because I've known Don for many years as well. So I came here in 1985 as a student from China, and so I somehow managed to decide to study with John Adler, professor, who, by the way, actually is a very good physicist. He just had a good temper. And Don was in the lab, got to know him over the years. So I don't have a prepared speech. I just felt, I really feel like to come up and say a few words. One of the things I remember Don about was he really loved playing country music on his old radio. All the students hated it, including me. This is probably why I never got to learn to grow, to love country music. I love all the other music except country. And another thing Don would do is he saw something temporarily wrong. He would shake his head over more. And of course, he introduced me the proper way to learn all the proper words in the new language I had to learn. Power plant. He tried to get me to play baseball with him. I said, no, I don't do that. That's for girly stuff. I'm sorry I said that. But I said that to him at the time. And he said, okay, well then, I'll let you off. So I finished my master's degree with John Adler's group. Then I went on to McMaster, finished my PhD. Then came back here to take on a job, and I reconnected with Don Mullin. And I've stayed in touch with him over the years. And actually, just a few weeks before Don passed away, I was still thinking, maybe I should connect with Don and go for a beer. But then a few weeks later, I learned about the sad news. And, to be honest, I really did not sleep well for that night. Don has had a profound influence on me in terms of my career, my life. You all know Don is a fun-loving person. If you're fortunate enough to become friends with him one way or another, you fall in love with him. He's just a loving person. So I'll end with that. I know he loved the Guinness, and actually he took me to the power plant and bought me and I tasted something. Gee, it's awful. Tastes like pizza. So that's Don. I'm not sure why. Maybe he's Irish heritage. In any case, so here, this is for Don.
Hi, my name's Lee Ramsdale. I'm not very good at public speaking, and I find this really difficult. I met Don 50 years ago today, so it's a bit of a tough day for all of us. Dr. Beanie spoke about Don winning the university award for being an outstanding technician, and not many technicians get that award. I actually managed to get that award also, but I only got it because of Don. So Don started out, as far as I know, and maybe I'm wrong, he didn't start out doing machining. He actually went to Navy and did a lot of machine shop courses, but he did electronics. And the U of A had a lot of really brilliant people in electronics. In the physics department, there was an engineer by the name of Michael Burke. And anybody who spent time knew Michael Burke. And he was in some ways a little bit like John Adler. In other words, he could be a little difficult. And almost every electronics technician had a run-in with the highly respected Michael Burke. But one technician didn't, and that was Don Mullin. And what Don could do better than any other technician throughout campus was build circuit boards and layouts, and they were phenomenal. And the work that he could do, unless you're spent time doing electronics, you would not be able to appreciate just how well he could do that sort of work. But he was a very fun-loving guy, and I remember one time there was 4 of us decided we should rent canoes and canoe down from Lake Louise to Jasper. So there was Don, myself, Ted Medisky, and Ian Morrison, and we all figured we were really good canoeists. Well, it turned out we weren't quite as good as what we thought, because we got in the canoe at a campground at Lake Louise, went under the bridge, and went around the corner, and there were these huge, they called haystacks. So there were rapids, and the waves were quite high. Well, Ted Medisky and Ian Morrison went first, and they were trying to get square to go through these rapids, and they didn't make it, and they capsized. However, Don was a little better, and he was in the front, so he got us steered up and lined up, so we were able to go through the rapids. Unfortunately, we packed the canoe incorrectly. Well, maybe it wasn't incorrectly, but we didn't prepare the canoe correctly. So we had all our food and all our camping gear and everything between the front and the rear seats. And as we went through the rapids, the water came over top, and the canoe began to fill up. We got lower and lower and lower. And finally, we went through about half the stacks, and Don said, screw this, to the pedal, and dove in. Because he figured we could get to the side easier. We managed to survive and later on we found all our packages floating on the river, so we were able to have our steaks and everything else. But we continued on, and so finally we found a way. On the third day, we found a way into Banff, which was pretty cool. And then Don saw this rather attractive lady, so he wanted to take a little closer look. So we paddled over there, and this woman looked at Don and says, "What are you guys doing? Looking for beavers?" Which was, well, that was too much for Don to handle. And we continued on, and we hit the cable that stopped and tipped the canoe over so we wouldn't go over the falls. I lost my wallet, I lost all my money, lost the keys to the car. But it gave me memories that I shall never forget. So that's one of the stories about Don.
Yeah.
Okay, wait, before we invite Mom up, just because Lee would talk a little bit about canoe trips, I want to tell one more canoe trip story. And Uncle Ron, you need to come back up. Just for like a 1 minute story.
No problem.
Yeah, you'll remember that.
Oh, yeah. I know which one this one.
Yeah. Hot summer day. Take it from there. Take it from there.
Hot summer day. Don takes me out canoeing, and this would be maybe my second or third trip with him. But however, he sets me up with this guy. Like, I don't know if I can say his name like Ed Hare or not, but anyways, puts me in the canoe with this guy, and we're chasing balls back and forth. I think
Me and Dad were in the canoe.
Yeah. Chris and his dad were in the one canoe, and we were in the other one, and we're tossing it back and forth. So he threw it over here, we get the canoe and maneuver and get the ball back and forth. However, this one time I threw it, the canoe rocked a little bit, and of course, we'll just call this guy Hank for now. Hank leaned in the direction
He
I threw.
wasn't counterintuitive.
He was not counterintuitive. There's a lot of things he's not. And anyways,
And it happened kind of in slow mo.
it was in slow-mo, but he totally tipped the canoe. It was his fault. I had nothing to do with it. I was in control. He tips the canoe over. So what happens? We had a case of 24 in that canoe. We're both down in the water in the, what's that river called? North Saskatchewan. And guess what? It's freezing cold. It's really cold. The 24
Pilsner.
pill is going down, and me watching this go down, I'm thinking this can't go down, so I go out to grab it. I grab it and I'm trying to bring it up. Well, good luck with that. I can't even swim. Yeah. So anyways, Don the genius, the simple genius, what did he do? He made us wrap everything in garbage bags before we left. After the canoe tipped, we got up to the surface. What are we looking at? Garbage bags going all the way down the river.
I think the important thing to mention here is that as you went under with that beer and kept going down into the depths of the water, it disintegrated. You came back up and got a breath of air. And as Hank was coming up like a drowning weasel and trying to get in our canoe, my dad was hitting him with the paddle to get off so that he wouldn't tip our boat. So thanks, Hank, for floating down the river the rest of the way.
I have to say one more thing. Is the next year, I asked Hank again. I said, "Hey, Hank," I says, we're going on a canoe trip. How do you feel about going on the canoe trip? And he said, well, you know, or Haas, they used to call me. Haas, I don't think I want to go, but there's one good thing about it. I said, what's that? He says, that beer's still on ice.
We'd like to close everything out. Again, thank you so much for coming out. It has been such a pleasure to see everybody out here again, and so many lifelong friends. It's been very tough over the last year, but having friends like you and relatives like everyone in this room, it's been a huge source of solace for us. So thank you so much. My mom would like to close everything out, and again, thanks for coming.
I'll lower the mic.
Thanks. First of all, I got to wave to my family in Scotland. I'm so happy to see so many people out here today, but it doesn't surprise me. And I was fortunate to be married to this man for 52 years. He was just the best of the best. And I'm so happy to see everybody, friends that I haven't seen for years. And he's gone, but he'll never be forgotten for any of us. Thanks.
Thank you, everyone.
Lots of free tickets, so if you need another free ticket, come and see us, and thanks you guys.
Thank you, everyone.